Help me. The weak voice was almost drowned in the strains of classical music flowing in the banquet hall. The cold marble floor pierced his skin as he tried to stand up, but his knees trembled. The silk-white dress she was wearing was stained red on the sleeves, blood from scratches she had made herself while trying to fight back. Before him, a man in a black suit stood with a slanting smile, his eyes like a wolf who had just found prey. "I don't like noisy brides," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "But if you keep fighting, maybe I'll enjoy tonight more." Neon bit her lip, holding back anger and fear. He tried everything to escape, but every door was locked. Every corner of the room was filled with well-built men who made sure he could not escape. This matchmaking was not his desire. Her father, the man she once trusted as her protector, sold her to a man named Kang Jisoo, a wealthy businessman known for his cruelty. However, just as Kang Jisoo stepped closer, another voice stopped her. "This party is enough." The voice is calm, deep, yet has undeniable power. All heads turned. In the doorway, a man stood with his hands in his pockets, dressed in a black suit with neatly combed hair. The light of the crystal chandelier above him reflected the familiar silhouette of his face, so familiar that the room seemed to freeze for a moment. JIN, BTS world star. A man whose face anyone would recognize, yet shouldn't be in a place like this. Jisoo frowned. "What do you mean?" JIN walked slowly to the middle of the room, his eyes sharply looking at the man. "You know what I mean." For a moment, the room felt empty. Neon looked at the man with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Why is he here? What's the deal with this matchmaking? And more importantly, on whose side is he really? Silence swallowed the room. All eyes were on JIN, who was still standing quietly in the middle of the hall, his face expressionless. Neon is still trying to understand what happened. BTS's JIN, a global icon, a man she could only see from cell phone screens and billboards on the streets, now stood before her, challenging the man who was about to destroy her life. Jisoo squinted. "I don't care who you are," he said in a low, cold voice. "But this is none of your business." JIN smiled a little, like someone who already knew he was going to win. "It's none of my business," he said. "You know why?" Instantly, four men in black suits appeared from behind the door, their steps firm, carrying something that made Jisoo's face harden. A black map. "Even wolves can be tamed," JIN whispered as one of the men handed the folder into Jisoo's hands. "If you know their weak points." Jisoo opened the folder. Her eyes quickly read the contents of the document in it. The next instant, he clenched his jaw, his fingers trembling furiously. "Are you threatening me?" Hissing, JIN continued to smile lightly. "I just give you a choice." Jisoo looked at him intently, then glanced at Neon, who was still sitting limply on the floor with confused eyes. He snorted, then closed the folder violently. "You think you can just save him?" Jisoo looked at JIN with a threatening look. "We'll see who wins in the end." JIN just shrugged his shoulders. "I don't like to lose." Jisoo threw one last look at Neon before turning around and leaving, followed by her men. Only silence remained after that. Neon looked at JIN, still breathing heavily. "Why are you?" JIN held out his hand to her. "Stand up first," he said. Hesitating, Neon accepted the helping hand. JIN's fingers were warm, firm, but there was something behind his eyes that made his heart flutter. He was not just a kind man who happened to come to her rescue. He has his own agenda, and Neon will soon find out. Neon sat quietly in the back seat of a black car that drove by in the middle of the night. Rain fell slowly, creating blurry patterns on the windows. Beside him, JIN sat quietly, one hand on his lap, while the other played his silver ring. After leaving the banquet hall, JIN took her without a word, just telling her to get in the car. No explanation. There's no answer to the question. Finally, Neon couldn't take it anymore. "Who are you really?" His voice trembled, between fear and curiosity. JIN turned his head, his eyes deep, as if weighing how much he could say. "Do I look like someone who just happened to pass by and save you?" he asked back, his voice calm but piercing. Neon bit her lip. "Of course not." JIN sighed, looking out the window. "I have business with Jisoo," he said at last. "And coincidentally, you were part of that affair." Neon's chest tightened. "So, I'm just a tool." JIN looked back, this time more sharply. "I saved you from hell. Does that sound like someone just using it as a tool?" Neon wants to believe. But something in the way JIN spoke, the way he controlled the situation, felt too premeditated. The car finally stopped in front of a tall building in the city center. Neon glanced outside. reading the name of the luxury hotel she recognized from the news. This is where executives and famous figures stay. Stay here for a while, Jin said as he opened the door. I'll take care of the rest. Nayeon looked at him suspiciously. Take care of what? Jin smiled a little. To keep you alive. The answer made his fur bristle. One thing is for sure, it's not over yet. The night sky in Seoul is filled with shimmering city lights, but for Nayeon, everything feels bleak. He stood on the balcony of his hotel room, hands clasped tightly against the iron railing, his mind still spinning on the events of a few hours ago. Jin saves her, or rather, takes her from Jisoo. But it was not an act without reason. The man is not the type to act aimlessly. What does he really want from me? The sound of a knock on his door jolted him. His heart was pounding as he walked closer, sticking his ear in the door. It's me. Jin's voice sounded from outside. Hesitating, Nayeon opened the door. Jin stood in the doorway with a relaxed expression, carrying a paper bag from the hotel restaurant. You haven't eaten yet, he said, lifting the bag slightly. Nayeon just stared at him without moving. Jin walked in uninvited, putting the food on a small table in the corner of the room. He sat down on the sofa, then looked at Nayeon, who was still standing by the door. Are you still afraid of me? Nayeon clenched her fingers. I'm not afraid, he said, though his voice wavered slightly. I just don't understand why you're doing all this. You're no ordinary man. You are SHHHHH, Jin cut in quickly. I know who I am. Nayeon nodded her head. Then why did you involve yourself in this mess? Jin leaned his body against the sofa, his eyes staring at the ceiling like he was remembering something. Then he said quietly, Jisoo has been at the top for too long. It's time someone dropped it. But why me? Nayeon insisted. Jin looked at him for a long time before finally saying, because you're the key to destroying him. Instantly, the room temperature noticeably drops by several degrees. Before Nayeon could ask any further, suddenly the lights in the hotel room flickered once, twice, then completely off, dark, and then the sound of the creak of the open balcony door. There's someone outside. Jin stood up immediately, his eyes sharp. Stand behind me, he said softly, but his tone was full of command. The sound of the creak of the open balcony door echoed in the darkened room. The eve of the night sneaks in, carrying the scent of rain that still remains in the air. Jin stood upright in front of Nayeon, his body tense like a wolf preparing to pounce. Nayeon wanted to turn her head, wanting to make sure what she had just seen was not her imagination. But he knows. It's real. There's someone on the balcony. Then came the sound of steps. Slow down. Measurable. Jin moved quickly. In one motion, he pulled Nayeon behind him and stepped forward. Who's there? His voice sounded calm, but there was a hidden tension behind it. The figure did not immediately answer. Just stand still in the shadows. But then, Nayeon could hear something, the sound of breathing. Heavy and deep. I'm disappointed. The man's voice finally sounded, low and cold. I hear you're more cautious than this, Jin. Jin sighed a little, as if not surprised. You've always loved drama, haven't you? Nayeon felt the cold of the floor under her feet. He tried to focus, trying to recognize the voice. But all he knew was that it wasn't Jisoo's voice. It's someone else. Someone equally dangerous. The silhouette on the balcony stepped forward, finally revealing itself under the moonlit light. A man in a black suit, his face half covered with shadows. You think saving her will solve everything? The man looked at Nayeon, his eyes sharp as daggers. You have no idea how deep this is, Jim. Jin smiled a little. And you don't know how far I'm going to go to make sure he's alive. The tension in the air was getting heavier. Nayeon could feel her own breath becoming short. Then, the man reached into his suit. In an instant, the genie grabbed something from under his shirt, a small knife, shimmering in the darkness. Nayeon held her breath. Meanwhile, the man on the balcony only laughed softly. We'll see who's faster this time. And in an instant, it moved. Nayeon couldn't move. But as he saw the silhouette of someone standing on the balcony, something inside him screamed. The man on the balcony moves like a shadow fast, barely noticeable. Nayeon hadn't even had time to react when Jin darted forward, the knife in his hand glistening in the darkness. This is not the first time he has fought. The man's shoulders rotated, avoiding Jin's attack. Then in one motion, he unsheathed a thin dagger from behind his suit and slashed it towards Jin. Srack. Metal meets metal. Jin parried the attack with his short blade, creating a small spark as the blades met. Still as fast as ever, the man whispered, his smile faint but dangerous. You too, Jin replied flatly, his eyes still locked on his opponent. Nayeon stood frozen in the corner of the room. Who was this man? How could Jin fight like someone who had been trained for years? The genie stepped forward, swinging his knife low, a move enough to make the man take a step back. But not out of fear, except that the man was judging the genie. How long has it been since we last fought like this? The man asked casually, like two old friends who are remembering the past. Jin did not answer. He only moved the knife with one hand, a light gesture that signaled that he was ready to continue. The man smiled a little. You have changed, Jin. You never cared about anyone else. But now, his eyes turned to Nayeon, who was still standing still, frightened. Now you even risk your life for him? Jin did not react, but his fingers tightened slightly on the handle of the knife. The man sighed softly. Too bad. Then, before the genie could move, the man suddenly pulled something from his belt. A gun. Nayeon gasped. In a split second, the genie grabbed the table lamp beside him and threw it at the man. Break. The light broke when it hit the man's hand, making the gun come off and fall to the floor. Jin immediately moved, kicking the gun away. But the man did not panic. Instead, he just laughed quietly. I think I should retire tonight. Then, with one nimble jump, he jumped over the balcony railing and disappeared into the darkness of the night. Nayeon was still holding her breath as Jin rushed to the balcony, her eyes sweeping around. But the man was gone, like a ghost that appeared and disappeared in an instant. Silence enveloped the room. Jin turned around, looking at Nayeon with a hard-to-read expression. We have to get out of here. Nayeon nodded her head. Who is he? Jin paused for a moment before finally saying, someone who won't stop until you're dead. Nayeon still felt her heartbeat echoing in her chest. The air in the hotel room was cold, but his palms were wet with sweat. Jin has just saved her again, and this time, the threat comes from a mysterious man who is even more dangerous than Jisoo. Without saying much, Jin grabbed his jacket and looked at Nayeon. We go now. Nayeon shook her head, taking a step back. I'm not leaving until you tell me who that man was. Jin took a deep breath. His eyes were sharp, but there was something there, like indecision. We don't have time for this. Nayeon clenched her hands. If you want me to believe you, you have to start telling the truth. Jin looked at him for a long time. Then, in a low voice, he said, his name is Kong Miho. He used to be someone I worked with. Nayeon looked at him in disbelief. You mean you know him? The genie turned towards the balcony, as if remembering something distant. We were once on the same side. But now, she works for Jisoo. An invisible blow hit Nayeon's chest. So he came to kill me? Jin nodded slowly. And he's not the one who failed twice. Fear crept over Nayeon's body. He wanted to think this was all just a nightmare that would end once he woke up. But the reality is too real. Jin walked over, his voice softer this time. I know it's a lot to digest, but one thing you must understand. Jisoo will not stop. Miho won't stop. They're going to come after you, and I'm the only person who can make sure you stay alive. Nayeon bit her lip, her mind spinning wildly. Why me? He whispered. What makes me so important that they want me dead? Jin paused for a moment, then said quietly, because you're not just a victim, Nayeon. You are the key to destroying them. The room feels narrower. Nayeon looked at Jin, trying to understand the meaning of his words. What do you mean? Before the genie could answer, the vibrating sound of the phone broke the silence. Jin took it out of his pocket and looked at the screen. His eyes turned cold. We have to go? Now. Nayeon knew it wasn't over. This is just the beginning. Jin's car drove through the streets of Seoul that were wet with the rest of the rain. The light of a street lamp reflected off the window glass, creating faint shadows on Nayeon's pale face. Nayeon's mind raced. I am the key to destroying them. What does that mean? His hand clutched the hem of his sweater, trying to drown out the anxiety. The genie next to him remained focused on driving, his expression cold as ever. Finally, Nayeon couldn't take it anymore. Tell me now, why does Jisoo want me dead? Jin didn't answer right away. He just tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, as if weighing how much he could reveal. Then, in a low voice, he said, because you know something you shouldn't know. Nayeon frowned. What do you mean? I didn't even know Jisoo before. Jin took a breath. You may not remember, but you were once a witness to something you shouldn't have seen. Nayeon's heart beat faster. Something like what? Jin glanced at him briefly before returning his focus to the road. Murder. The word hung in the air like lightning that struck suddenly. Nayeon froze. No way, he whispered. Jin continued, his voice calm but full of certainty. 3 years ago, there was a man who was found dead in the dock. It was not an accident, not a robbery. It was an execution. Nayeon nodded her head. What does that have to do with me? Jin looked up at him, his eyes gleaming. You were there that night, Nelly. You saw everything. Nayeon shook her head. Panic began to creep over her body. No, I don't remember. But they remember, Jin cut in. And that's why they want to erase you from this world. Nayeon's head was throbbing. It's trying to dig into memories, trying to remember something, anything. But everything ran away. Jin slowed his car, then pulled it over on the side of a deserted road. He turned to face Nayeon, this time his voice softer. That's why I'm here. To protect you until you can remember. Nayeon looked at him, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. But what if I never remember it? Jin looked at him for a long time before finally saying, then we have to find another way to bring them down, before they find a way to bring us down. The air in the car was getting heavier. Nayeon realized one thing. She wasn't just trying to survive. He is now part of a larger war than he ever imagined. Nayeon sat quietly in the car, her mind spinning like an endless whirlpool. I saw a murder? Am I a witness? But why can't he remember it at all? Jin watched him from the driver's seat. The dim light of a street lamp cast a shadow on his face, making him look more serious than usual. I know it's hard to believe, he said quietly, but human memory doesn't always work directly. Sometimes, the brain locks in traumatic memories as a protective mechanism. Nayeon shook her head quickly. But, why don't I remember? If I saw something so important, why didn't it pop into my head? Jin pressed his fingers against the steering wheel, thinking for a moment before answering. Because someone made sure you didn't remember. Nayeon looked at him intently. What do you mean? Jin took a deep breath, then finally revealed something that made Nayeon's blood freeze. You didn't just see the murder, Nayeon. You're the only survivor. The world seemed to stop. What? Nayeon whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Jin nodded. The man who was killed that night was not alone. There were several other people with him. Everyone's finished, except you. Nayeon's head began to throb. Blurry images began to appear in his mind. The sound of a shot, a flash of light in the dark, the smell of metal piercing his nose. Nayeon gasped. His chest felt tight. I was there. You were hiding. You weren't supposed to be there, but somehow you witnessed it all. And someone found me, told me that there was a girl who made it out alive. Jin looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. That's why I helped you in the first place. Nayeon bit her lips. Her hands trembled. Then, how could I forget? Do I have amnesia? Jin nodded. This is no ordinary amnesia. Your memory has been erased. Nayeon looked at him in horror. What do you mean accidentally deleted? Jin paused for a moment, then said, there is someone who has access to technology that can erase or suppress certain memories. Jisoo has connections with people who can do that kind of thing. Nayeon felt her hair stand up. It's not just about escapism. It's not just about survival. It's about discovering who he really is. How can I remember it back? His voice sounded stronger this time, full of determination. Jin looked at him for a long time, then said, there is one way, but it's dangerous. Nayeon nodded her head. Whatever it is, I'm ready.